I've got a really special guest with me today. Somebody who, in fact, has had an impact on I suppose, my career. Who has an impact on, not only I suppose, the direction, but also me really thinking about what's best for my career, and in fact, helping me to turn it around from one that was not so happy, not so fulfilled, to one that is really on a path of fulfillment. So I really recommend that you get a pen, get a paper, you stop all distractions, close all windows, and listen intently to Richard Barrett, who I have with me today. Thanks for being with me, Richard.
No, you're very welcome, Alex.
Excellent. Richard is an author, speaker, and internationally recognized thought leader on the evolution of human values in business and society. He's a fellow of the World Business Academy and an advisory board member of the Centre for Integral Wisdom, an honorary board member of the Spirit of Humanity Forum, and former values coordinator at the World Bank. And of course, Rich is also chairman and founder of the Barrett Values Centre. The Barrett Values Centre, that's actually where I found myself when I was trying to find my path. And what that helped me with was, it really helps in terms of getting those metrics that really help you to, I suppose, understand your own values, your own personal values, and particularly leaders as well. It helps to, I suppose, help you to realize, understand, and measure and manage the actual path, the values that you have, and therefore align them to organizations and people that have similar values to yourself. So again, thank you, Richard. And I suppose my first burning question is, how did this all come about for you? How did you get to this point that you're at now? How did it all come about?
Well, yes, to give our listeners and viewers a little background, I'm a bit older than I look. I'm about 10 years older. I'm just a 1071. So in the latter part of, or half of my life, anyhow. I hope to live longer than my mum, and she lived to be 100. So let's see.
Wow.
But yeah, I go back to about when I was roughly in my 40s or 45 years old, and this is a time in people's lives, the 40s, when they go through a process called self-actualization, where they begin to find out who they really are, but also what their purpose and passion in life is. And I realized, having followed my career went to university, studied engineering, studied transportation planning, really enjoyed my job, went to the World Bank, traveled all over the world, and suddenly in my early 40s, I realized I was bored with my success, actually, and that what was really, really, really important to me was not transportation, but transformation. And that led me to start the company, and it led me to invent a way for measuring consciousness and mapping values. And when you say, Alex, changed your life, I mean, I managed to change your life with never meeting you. It was all happened just through using one of our values assessment tool, which is free and online. And maybe we'll let people know that before the end of the program.
Certainly.
So yeah. So anyhow, what I can say is that if you're not yet into your 40s, you are in a process of what I call individuating. Carl Jung called it individuating too. He first gave that name to it. And what you're doing, you're letting go of all of the enculturation from your family, from your background. You begin to find who you really are and what you value and what's important to you. And finding out your values is fundamental if you're looking for a job, because you know then what values you resonate with and what values you want in the organization where you're working. And and that was part of what happened to me in a way. Not only did I find my passion in my 40s, but I realized that the values of the World Bank were not my values, and that I needed to set up my own company and go out into the world and follow who I really was, not what was expected of me.
Excellent. And I suppose, there's a lot now in the media, especially, and I think the focus tends to be a lot on millennials, but it's not just the millennials who have to go through this process by any means. But how do you actually, does the Barrett Value Centre have a typical customer, a typical personality who comes to you and says, "I need your help" at all, or is it generally quite a broad brush?
Well, we try to provide services for many people as we can. Obviously, we want to make money. That's what we set up. So we make our money by mapping the values of organizations or teams and leaders and feeding that back to them, and they then taking that on board and beginning to make changes so that they can become individually more aligned with who they are, and as organizations they can build a culture which is aligns with what they want to create, and therefore every year they map the culture of the organization, and what happens is they get into closer and closer alignment, they become more and more successful. So we've got major clients of 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people, and we've got lots of very small teams of 10, 12, etc. as clients, and then individuals who can use our individual values assessment. So we try to cater for everybody. But what I do as a founder and chairman, I've been, when I stopped running the company about 6 or 7 years ago and handed that over to my CEO, that allowed me to write books. And that's what I've been doing. I've been writing a book a year for the last 6 years, and books with titles such as A New Leadership Paradigm, or What My Soul Told Me, A Practical Guide to Soul Activation. So on the spiritual side, on the leadership side. Another book is Love, Fear, and the Destiny of Nations. So how's the world evolving? And I'm just birthing a new book right now called A New Psychology of Human Wellbeing. And so this is my gift now. This is what I love to do, is to write, and somehow these words of wisdom flow through me, and I put them on paper and send them out, and people like you and other people read them and they go, "Oh my God, this is so, oh wow, that is connected the dots." It's like, so that's what I love to do. That's what I do. And so I think this comes back to people, when they're looking for a job, not only do they need to align their values with the company. So therefore you have to know your values, and the link we're going to give in a few minutes will tell people how to do their own values assessment. But you have to align your values with the values of the company. And if your values don't align, go somewhere else. Go find another company to work for. And then you've got to find out what you're passionate about. So it's living a values-driven life and leading a purpose-driven life. That's what makes you happy inside. Fundamentally, that's what it's all about.
And for those who perhaps are on the beginning of that journey, or perhaps there may be even people listening who hadn't necessarily thought that values were important in their career, are there any sort of symptoms that, or typical symptoms that people might have that lead them to, to really need to change what they're doing in order to really be fulfilled and happy?
Sure. First of all, let's get clear. There are positive values and there are what we call potentially limiting values. Now, if you at any time you feel fearful or uneasy, that's because there's the presence of a potentially limiting value. So, for example, if you're blaming somebody else, or you are actively denigrating somebody, or you will be operating with the potential limiting values. These are values which are driven by your fears of not getting enough, not being enough, and not being loved enough. And so the key really is we all have these moments when we get upset and when we get angry. And if you've got an anger or upset moment, you're not living in alignment with your values. In fact, I call that emotional pain. When you feel you want to punch somebody in the face, you're really pissed off with somebody.
I've had that, yeah.
Yeah, well, we all have it. We get impatient. Right at that moment, you're not in alignment with who you really are at the deepest level of your being. And so all of that emotional pain, whenever you feel that pain, it's a positive sign saying, hey, there's something you need to work on. So every time you get upset, you need to think, oh my God, I'm getting feedback that I'm not in alignment, you see? And then the question is, well, what do I do about that? The thing is to get into alignment. Well, there's lots of different tricks for that. I write a lot about that in I think it's my most popular book, What My Soul Told Me, A Practical Guide to Soul Activation. But it tells you about, okay, so when you have these angry moments, when you have these upset moments, tells you how to look inside and find out what went wrong and how to make it right again. I mean, you yourself, Alex, you did your Our Values assessment, and then something happened to you. Tell us what happened to you.
Well, yeah, and I would recommend, as I said, I'm going to put the link as well to the values assessment tool, because I think it's important that everybody listening should at least do it. What did it do to me? Well, it really made me, I suppose it made me sit up and think, for one, because I'd been going from job to job, just looking at jobs that involved, skills that match my skills, and working for businesses that I thought I could really sort of, I suppose money was obviously a big objective for me. So what it really did for me is it really refocused my attention on things that were important to me. And I think in that sense, one of the things that's important to me is helping people. And as much as I do that in my day-to-day job, I probably didn't realize how much I enjoyed it and how much fulfillment I get from it. So it really refocused me. It helped me to then, isolate those businesses and those particular professions, because it's not just recruitment that you can help people. It helped me to isolate professions that I can help people, essentially. And also, another thing it did is that it helped me to, and this is actually leads me on to another question, is it helped me to find people who had very similar values to my own, because that for me is important. You're always going to work with people who don't necessarily, you don't always agree with, but for the most part, if you do an assessment like this, it can help you to really not only find those people, but also to understand people better, and therefore, put in place strategies of your own for dealing with people that you don't necessarily agree with. So it had many effects for me, Richard. And I suppose, as I said, it leads me on to the next question. How I mean, for me, it might be different to other people, but is there a particular way of, I suppose, finding those people who you're aligned to, so that you can actually be happier and a bit more fulfilled at work?
That's a hard question to answer, but here's something that you can do. When you go for a job interview, you've done Our Values assessment, you know what your values are. You go into the job interview and they will ask you lots of questions, and then comes the point where they say, do you have any questions? That's the moment to strike. That's the moment to say, well, what are your values? What are the values of the company? And see if the person sitting behind the other side of the table knows what they are, struggles, or is it as completely clueless? Because, if they struggle or clueless or they don't know, then clearly this is not a values-driven company. And so it tells you immediately that that this may not be a company that you would like to work with, because many companies now realize how important living by their values are, and they actually spend time working with staff and helping them and deciding on what values do we want to live by, because it's a way of creating internal cohesion to have an agreed set of values with behaviors that everybody understands supports that value. Now, you asked me just offline before we started, what I'm up to, and I'm actually going to United Arab Emirates tomorrow to give 3 speeches at the Ministry of Education, where I'm going to be talking about bringing values to school kids and the impact of children being able to understand their values and the behaviors that go with them, is a game changer in schools. It's absolutely amazing what it happens. And it allows those kids to grow up with something called emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is being able to manage your emotions, knowing who you are. We also call it personal mastery. And so when you never been exposed to values and behaviors, you don't even know why you're doing things. You just react because you react. Well, when you've got emotional intelligence, you understand what's going on. Like you began to understand when you understood your values, you began to say, oh, wow, I can now make a positive choice to be this way rather than that way, you see. So anyhow, that's one tip I would give to anybody going for an interview, is to to step up and say, well, what are your values in the company? Have you studied your values in the company? Do you have a set of behaviors? Because here are my values. And you you will actually floor the interviewer, I'm sure, because they're looking for people. The good companies are looking for people who understand who they are, how they tick, and what they value.
No, definitely. And another thing, I think I've heard numerous, I suppose, lots of your talks online, on YouTube, etc. And one of the key things that you talk about is that any changes or this whole, I suppose, shift towards people realizing their own values is driven not by politicians, it's driven by business leaders of the future. And why do you say that? What's your point on that?
Well, my point on that is that I believe that we need to build a values-driven society. And if you go to my website, it's www.richardbarrett.net, and there you also get to the Values Center. As you said, there are lots of videos there. But the point is that I don't have a healthy respect for politicians because I see how they behave. And they behave a lot like children, in my opinion, who have never been to a values school, It's a lot of ego. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of self-interest. There's quite a bit of not telling the truth. And when you watch Parliament in action on the television, they shout at each other. They laugh at each other. They spend so much time blaming the other party. I mean, for me, this is like ridiculous, mm-hmm. because here they are supposed to be governing the country.
Absolutely.
And why aren't they working together and in dialogue and doing the best for everybody? They spend so much time trying to put the other people down and to look good so they can get re-elected again. I mean, so do I want to vote for these people? Absolutely not. Now, so where are the really intelligent people? They're in business. They're clever. They have emotional intelligence. They need it in order to build up their business, and they actually get things done. And so when you work in an organization with an inspired leader, this leader or that organization will help you to grow and develop, because the organization will understand you're their future capital. And so for me, I think that the future or the transformation of our society could actually come through business and through business leaders who recognize they need to build their people and grow their people. I don't see that happening so much in our political sphere. And in fact, the education system really goes against it, because what the education system does, it tries to build intellects. Well, actually, the most successful people in business are actually people with high levels of emotional intelligence. Schools don't teach it. Only values-driven schools or values-based schools, and there aren't that many, but there are more and more. Another interesting factor is that the leading cause of death for 15-year-old to 35-year-olds, which is the group we're talking about here, is suicide. Mm-hmm. So schools are not teaching kids how to manage their emotions and their lives. Because if they did, we wouldn't have so many suicides.
Sure.
So there's something terribly wrong with our education system, in my opinion. And in my new book, which is coming out soon, A New Psychology of Human Wellbeing, I'm pointing to that, and that's what my speeches in UAE are going to be about the next week.
And to that as well, as I said, I'm going to link to all your books. So I think we'll either put it, probably below this video. So click through and have a look at those books and buy any that you feel are relevant to you. As I said, this insight is really useful. So keep your screen open until we reach the end. So my next thing is, I mean, while we're on I suppose the subject of younger people, I don't know if this is media driven or if this is, sometimes when you read things in the media, you kind of think, is this what's really happening in the world, or is this necessarily what's driven by them? One thing I've noticed is that a lot of people, younger people particularly, are the ones who are the ones seeking businesses, seeking people, seeking ventures of their own that really are purposeful. Is that something that you recognise, and why do you think it's that younger generation that are doing it as opposed to probably later on in life?
So I have an answer to that. It's a little complex, but let's see if we can dissect it, okay? So everybody on the planet, including you and everybody else, grows in stages of psychological development. And I talk about that in my book. And the first three stages, surviving, conforming, and differentiating, we go through that up to the age of 25. Then we go into the individuating stage and the self-actualizing stage. So everybody grows in stages. And stages of development, and they operate at levels of consciousness. So you may have reached the individuating stage in your 30s, but you lose your job, you lose all your savings, you drop down to the survival level of consciousness, okay? So that's normal for everybody. So we grow in stages, we operate at levels, and we live inside a culture which, in order to get through the first 30 or 40 years of our life, we have to fit into that culture. So we become enculturated by the culture we're fitting into. And the individuating stage is when you begin to break out of that and say, well, who the hell am I? What are my values? I don't necessarily need to fit in because I can manage my survival needs and I can manage my relationship needs, and I've got a good level of self-esteem. So I can actually follow my own desires. So the point is that now I get really to the answer to your point, is this. From around 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we started having a better, how shall I put it, standard of living. And our parents grew up and became self-actualized without too many fears. And they started bringing up children who grew up without too many fears and grew up in a more informed world and a world with a different culture. And so these young people today have this wonderful start in life. Not everybody, but if you've got decent parents and the parents have worked hard and they've become self-actualized, they're going to bring you up without too many fears or problems. So now you're able to move through these stages of development much more quickly and begin to understand, oh yeah, not only do I have my values, but also I have a purpose. And actually that purpose is your soul talking to you, because everybody is a soul having a human experience, and the soul incarnates into the body for the purpose of self-expression, connection, and contribution. And so finding your self-expression or purpose is actually what it's all about. And if you've grown up without too many fears and you've moved through those early stages quite easily, then you're going to be looking for your purpose much younger in life. And that's my explanation.
I suppose then, by that then, I suppose if people are going on that journey, they may find their purpose at different points in their life. maybe some people.
Well, so most people generally find their purpose in their 40s.
Hmm.
You can find it a little earlier, but
Hmm.
that doesn't mean to say you're not living a purpose-driven life. You
Sure.
can live a purpose-driven life at 10 years old. I mean, but you're actually what juices you up, what you're really good at, what you love to do, usually comes in late 30s, early 40s, or during the 40s. Some people who have very difficult childhoods and have lots of issues with life never really find their purpose. So that's why it seems like people are doing it all through their lives, but actually, the 40s is when the time when that's when I changed my life completely. I was a transportation engineer. I became a transformation engineer, and I've spoken to so many people who changed their careers in their 40s in order to align with something that was really juicy for them, that really, that felt really cool.
Hmm. And to that as well, that leads me actually quite nicely onto my next point, because I experienced this myself in that I was looking for roles that paid well, that matched my skills. You know, in a couple of cases, I looked at the actual name of the business as well, whether it was sort of well known, for example. Why do you think so many people miss out altogether using values to as part of their search for something that's really in alignment with them?
Basically, education, really.
Okay.
I mean, that's why I'm a great fan of values-based education and values-based schools, and there are more and more of them. But because what they do is they equip you to move on to this, knowing yourself at a very early age, knowing who you really are, knowing what's important to you, and going for it. Nobody ever told me about this. I mean, I've had to figure this out myself as I went along. But there are many people like myself who have begun to understand and putting out books and information so that younger people can come along and say, "Oh, okay, I don't have to make all those mistakes. I
Mm-hmm.
can actually, I can actually learn about this now and live a life more in alignment with who I really am. Let's say my ego more in alignment with my soul, and yeah, and that's what happens. So, transformation in terms of society happens slowly, but we're actually going through a very rapid change at the moment, and it's fantastic to watch. And here you are, Alex. Look, I mean, you're doing these interviews. You're driven by your purpose. How did that come about? I ask you.
Well, as I say, I mean, I think it came from knowing that, I suppose realizing that I wasn't happy, and it came to the forefront of my mind. It came as well for me. A big point was when I had my first child, because I think for me, I wanted to say to my child when he's older, this is what I do, this is why I do it, this is who I help, this is what it does for the world. And the things I was doing before, not that they were totally despicable, but there were things that I wasn't necessarily happy to do. There was people, in some cases, I worked with a lot of nice people, but in other cases, it was people who I was working with, people who perhaps didn't have a strong set of values, or didn't necessarily have a good path. So for me, it was about being able to articulate to my children and also to those around me, this is the right thing to do, and knowing as well that we live in a world that is, that there are nice people in the world, but there are also people that who aren't so nice. It's being able to, I suppose, be on that side of being a better person for humanity as well, and helping others to get on with their lives. There are people less fortunate as well who I want to help. So one thing I do know is that opening up this realization has probably made me ask lots of questions and really want to do a lot of things. But I think one important thing I would say is that for anybody going through this process, it's important to really keep a focus on what's really important, because you could end up saying, I want to do this, that, and the other, and get so overwhelmed with all the things that you want to do that you end up not doing doing what you want to do. And so, yeah, avoiding overwhelmment.
That's a really important point you bring up there, Alex. If you want to be successful in life, you really have to focus and not get too distracted. I particularly found that in terms of the business I grew up, that built up and developed, and also in terms of my books. There are so many different things I could do with my life, but I get very, very highly focused when I'm writing a book. It takes a year to write a book, and my wife will tell you, she'll say, "Hey, Richard, I'm here. I haven't seen you for 3 days. Can we get together now?" So it's really, I'm exaggerating, but you get my point. It's really important, as you said, not to be distracted and to get really focused on what's important. And that's the way you build up a track record. You say you can build up achievements. You can say to the interviewer when you go for a new job, "Look, I did this and I did this." And so the other thing is really to explore your creativity. We are born to be creative. Here's an interesting fact. 98% of 3 to 5-year-olds have genius level creativity. By the time we get to 20, only 2% of the population has genius level creativity. Wow. Been measured many times. Why? Because it is socialized out of us by our educational system. Mm-hmm. And what does business want? It wants creativity. So that's why you've got to find your own self-expression. You've got to not let go of who you really are and find your own self-expression, because in there lies your creativity.
I think you're absolutely right, Richard. And I think there's an element of fear, I think, as well. When people, I know there was for me, and for a couple of people I've spoken to, I think some people think, or people I've spoken to think that, they need to do a 9 to 5 to get their pay packet. They need to do something that they don't necessarily enjoy in order to just get the basic things that they need. And they're often fearful of venturing away from that path and finding something that they're really, I suppose, focuses on their creative talents. Fear is something that a lot of job seekers, people changing their career, have to overcome. Have you had points in your life or seen any case studies of people who've had to overcome that fear? And
absolutely, I have had in my life, what I've learned is you've got to face the fear and do it anyway. This goes back to when I was in my 40s and I was in the World Bank as a transportation engineer. Suddenly realized I was bored with my career, realized that I had other gifts, transformation, helping people transform, not quite sure how or why. And so here I am in the World Bank, tax-free salary. If I stay another 10 to 15 years, I get a fantastic pension, a 6-figure pension.
Wow.
Mostly tax-free, and here I am at 40, in my mid-40s, saying, I can't stay. I have to leave to do this thing. And my friends are saying, okay, look, if you stay, you get all these benefits. If you're going off to do a job you've never done before, you have no credibility in that field. Aren't you taking a huge risk? Yeah. And the answer was, well, you could say that, but it's what I have to do. Mm-hmm. Face your fear and do it anyway.
Wonderful. And I just want to go back briefly to the, so as I said and as I recommended, people should really go to valuecenter.com and do the values assessment. What can they expect, just briefly, Richard, from that?
Okay, so you're going to write it down, but it's www.valuecenter.com/PVA, Personal Values Assessment. So you go there, and what you do is you go online and you're asked to pick 10 values that represent who you are, and you get a list, and you choose the ones. And then when you finish choosing the 10, you hit the button, it goes off into cyberspace. 2 or 3 minutes later, you get a report showing you which levels of consciousness you're operating from and explaining the levels of consciousness, and gives you a description of who you are based on your values. And what that does is it makes you realize what a wonderful person you are.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of says, oh, wow, I didn't know that about
Yeah.
myself. I didn't know that about myself. I'd never thought about it. And what you do is simply you pick 10 words that represent who you are. But what you get back is a dialogue or a description in sentences of what all of that means. And you begin to say, wow, that's interesting. Now, there's something else you can do with that, is it? If you have a girlfriend or boyfriend and you go online and do it, and they get them to go online and do it, then you can compare results and see whether you match values-wise, you know?
Yeah.
And that's actually what we do. I mean, that's how we earn money, doing it in larger organizations and teams. And there's a little more to it than that. But that we put that out. There's hundreds of thousands of people have done that, used that free assessment in just about 2.5 years.
And it's really quick to do. So even if if you're busy, it's very, very quick to do. And as Richard was saying, I think one of the key things if you're transitioning with your career, or you're in a role that's perhaps not going anywhere, sometimes your confidence can be really at a low ebb. So this can really, just like you said, help you to give you that little bit of a boost of confidence before you actually go on the whole hog of doing the job search. I really recommend it. So look out for the link to that below. And I just want to say, Richard, thank you so much for your time and for being with us. And Pete, you said that you're going to the UAE, you're going to Germany. When can we expect to see you in the UK? Are you going to be doing anything in the UK at all? Or?
What a brilliant question. Actually, I've got nothing planned in the UK.
Well, this could be an exclusive then, an exclusive UK,
Yeah, Alex, you got me exclusively. Man, you're a persuader, you are.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful.
No, I'll be doing something before the end of the year, but I'm not sure. If you line up to my blogs or when I'm doing something, I usually send out messages so that people can. You go to the website; it tells you what I'm up to, where I'm doing it, etc.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Richard, and we'll speak to you soon.
Hopefully, Alex.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.